one of the great examples of this, one of our first investments at Delphi was in imperfect foods. Imperfect foods, which, really pioneered this idea of the carrot with an extra leg or the slightly bruised apples sold directly to consumer, was founded on this idea that something 50 to 60% of most vegetables and other produce never make it to consumers because they're slightly misshapen or they don't meet the requirements of grocery stores. And so they're thrown out or composted or, they just never make it to people. And at the same time, you have a huge swaths of America that don't have access to organic, healthy, and nutritious food. And they saw this as an opportunity to arbitrage that and to sell direct to consumer at a lower cost and bring healthy, organic food directly to people.
Welcome to this week's episode of People Are the Answer. I truly believe that people are the only answer to the world's many problems. I'm Jeffrey Zucker, a serial entrepreneur, here to learn how innovators are creating outsized, transformational social impact and to shine a light on all the good happening in a world often hyper-focused on the negative. Today's episode features Pip Lawrence, the co-founder and managing partner of Delphi VC, a venture capital firm focused on building companies to address the most important problems facing the planet. Delphi has some popular portfolio companies like Imperfect Foods and Mindbloom, and they're one of the largest VC investors in the psychedelic space. Pip and I discuss his front seat to the nonprofit world growing up, going from studying neuroscience to running art galleries, making the jump to Wall Street amid the '08 crash, and ultimately finding psychedelic therapy, which led him to dedicate his business efforts to positive impact. Here is Pip Lawrence on People Are the Answer. Pip, thanks for joining me on People Are the Answer.
It's such a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed connecting with you recently, and we have some mutual friends, and I wasn't too familiar with Delphi, so it'd be great if you could just tell me a little bit about it.
Thank you so much. I have often thought about how I wanted to have an impact, and having worked for a number of years in the finance world in New York, I knew that business and finance was going to be a big part of how I have an impact. And when I split off in, 2016 to work with Stephen Wolfram's company, Wolfram Research, creators of the Wolfram Alpha search engine, on a new corporate venture capital vehicle to focus on seed investments around the blockchain and machine learning companies. It was an experience that introduced me into technology investing and also made me really think about how the sort of funding of businesses and accelerating of particularly mission-driven businesses can have a real impact. So in 2018, we split off to create Delphi, inspired by the Oracle of Delphi, which is really all about sort of looking into the future and what do we see when we look into the future? And the answer has always been sustainability, mission-driven companies, and really founders working to have a real impact. So that's what inspired me and my partner, Kalika Farmer, to launch Delphi and really go at this full strength and really around sort of creating community around how we all have impact.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to dig into that and the impact that you're focused on. But you kind of get a little bit of the answer to this from your previous answer. But what would you say generally motivates you in life?
I think that one of my key motivations has been around healing and growth, and how my personal experiences, particularly with psychedelics and plant medicine, how those have allowed me to overcome challenges in my life, helped me sort of inform the way that I think about that I can change, and I can change the direction of my life. I have that agency to heal myself, and I can really help bring those tools and access to those sorts of therapies to a wide audience. And, psychedelics is really the beginning point of a lot of the work that we do around healing. but it extends into the work that we do in sustainable agriculture, in food investments, in some of the conservation work that we're doing. So it's really all this sort of circular, holistic approach to the world, but sort of rooted in psychedelics. And so for me, that's what
Yeah.
has always sort of been an inspiration.
I mean, that holistic approach is so representative of kind of the psychedelic community and psychedelics in general, how, at least in my experience, make you feel sort of one with the universe. We are all one together. And I love how you've brought that concept into your investment practice.
Yeah, thank you. I grew up with a father who's a headmaster of girls' boarding schools, including Emma Willard and Ethel Walker, sort of the old line East Coast academia. And, in later years, he was a museum director associate director at the Norman Rockwell Museum in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. And I grew up around the world of sort of philanthropy and nonprofit strategy. So there was always an expectation that I too would go into nonprofits and sort of education. And then I didn't do that. And but I like to think that I was not a disappointment in that regard. It was a different sort of way to give back. But I've always sort of looked at education and philanthropy as really important components of how we as communities and we as people sort of look at how we leverage our tools to give back, and really seeing the way that I think a new generation of founders and a new generation of businesses are able to do that also from a for-profit side, is really inspiring.
Yeah, that's something that's come up on this show before. The for-profit nonprofit designation. I personally am not a huge fan of it. I think you can often create more sustainable impact in a for-profit model. So, I definitely think you've met and surpassed, the nonprofit expectations you had. And for me, business is the most powerful vehicle for change. So I certainly understand taking that path.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think that this question of for-profit, nonprofit sometimes has been a little bit too belabored. And I think that, at least for us and at Delphi, we really look at a hybrid approach, and that's led us to looking at launching a foundation next year to do sort of more strategic philanthropy that aligns with the values of our for-profit business. And all of it is just accretive to this mission of funding and accelerating ventures, whether they're for profit, whether they're nonprofit, as long as they're sort of contributing and building towards this better world that we're, I think all trying to create.
Yeah, I follow a similar philosophy in my efforts, and it's really great to see you, having that foundational element to the work that you're doing. And you talked about growing up sort of in the nonprofit sector. Are there any major experiences you recall from childhood that just made you want to give back in some capacity in your life or led you in that direction?
Yeah, that's a great question. My family was in the limestone business for 140 years. And we did a lot of the marble and limestone that went into various monuments around Washington, D.C., the floors of the Capitol building and the Senate and the House are limestone and as marble from our quarries. And so I always saw the sort of impact of creating jobs locally. And the way that as a community in Western Massachusetts, my family's business of quarries were really employing generations of families, and many of them were immigrants from Italy who were very talented stone carvers and stonemasons. And for generations, it gave them an opportunity to create their own futures and to bring, their children up and educate them. And for me, I think that experience of owning a family business really gave me that clear lens on the impact that a business can have on a community of people. And I
Yeah.
think that that's also what really drove me to, become a venture capital investor, where we're really working on an active basis on a weekly and monthly and yearly basis to find as many entrepreneurs that are looking to do this kind of impact building, whether it's in their own communities, but really people that are looking at sort of a global impact. And so, yeah, I guess I think that sort of business lens has always been a big part of giving back for me, and how I think that, you know, often the tools of growth and the tools of sort of, modern capitalism, if you will. And it's not to say that capitalism doesn't have its shortcomings, but I do think that supporting founders and businesses is something that really from an early age I've understood has an outsized impact on people and people's lives.
Yeah, certainly does, and something that I've been fortunate to be witness to as well. And the support that you can provide just in employment, like you were saying, is tremendous. And so growing up in that business, can you tell me about the path from going to college to becoming a VC?
Yeah, I really did not follow the straight and narrow path. I was um, a pretty rebellious teenager, and I think always kind of thinking outside of the box. And that's what led me to leave boarding school at 16 from Northfield Mount Herman and to go straight to college. I went to Simon's Rock, which is a pretty progressive, unique school that's part of Bard on the East Coast. And, students there really start whenever they're ready. I remember Ronan Farrow was there at the same time as me, and he was 12 years old, starting a rigorous BA program. I think he would go on to do his PhD at Yale at like 17. I wasn't quite that advanced, but I started college at 16. And I was always really drawn to the brain and to learning. So I studied a lot of cognitive neuroscience and sort of function and structure and of the brain. But I was always drawn to the arts, and I was always drawn to sort of creative activities. And I knew early on that I had this enduring love of the arts, and having grown up around the Norman Rockwell Museum as a child, gave me that appreciation early on. So later, when I went to college and went to school in New York City, I worked in art galleries on my nights and weekends on the Upper East Side, working with modern masters and old masters, and really learning the trade of the art world. And while in school, I did pre-med, and I was really dead set on going into medicine. I just had this moment where I came to it and I thought, when I think about all the things I want to do in this life and all of the things that I want to accomplish, I just don't know that for me, going to school for another 8 to 10 years is really what I want to spend my 20s doing. So I didn't do that. And I thought about, going to finance, sort of a traditional transition right out of college. And then an opportunity actually came up to me to start a contemporary art gallery. And I was always really drawn to contemporary art, but it wasn't what I was doing professionally. I was working at sort of modern masters. And so when this opportunity came up, I seized it. And I walked in on day one to this sort of Lower East Side, New York, art gallery that was really just a construction site. It was a guy from Los Angeles who said he wanted to bring a gallery over here. And, he's looking for somebody to do it with. And I said, pick me, let's do this. And I came on essentially as an intern on day one. But 6 weeks later, by the time that opening night of the first show happened, I had already graduated to gallery director. So
Wow.
I had a very quick sort of installation in the management of that business. And what was really interesting about that experience is that we had our first exhibition, which was a group show of 25 artists uh, from all over the US and beyond, really cutting edge practices from, sculpture to video and painting. And the show is a success. We were reviewed by Jerry Saltz and Roberta Smith, really the top New York art critics. And as a result, we just had this meteoric success overnight, and it was amazing. We had just show after show was more and more successful, and we built up this following. And it was really my sort of original experience of that kind of business growth and success happening at an exponential rate. And it was, goodness, such a formative experience for me. That gallery is called Rental, and it
It
was
sounds
also
like a
interesting.
whirlwind.
It was a whirlwind, and
Yeah.
what was really cool was that we were turning the traditional gallery model on its head, and we were saying, what if instead of representing artists, we would actually rent our gallery to other galleries, but not any other gallery. We would actually curate a program of other galleries from around the world and invite them to come do a show in our space. And we got really amazing, exciting, high quality galleries from around the world to come in and to be part of the program. And it was just an amazing experience. And then 26 shows later, Lehman Brothers happened. And, September 2008, for those of us that remember, basically the art world turned off in an instant. And I remembered at that time my partner's voice in the back of my head saying, it's a good time to sort of search for new opportunities and stay involved in art, but really look at new opportunities. And so I figured, since so many people were leaving Wall Street, it would be a good time to go the other way and get my foot in the door. And that's exactly what I did. I had no experience. I had some connections, but I really wasn't leveraging those. And I was able to sort of talk my way into an entry-level internship at a private equity firm. And from that, working 2 days a week in private equity and 5 days a week at the gallery over a year, I was able to sort of build up the vocabulary and working 7 days a week. And then that gave me the skills and tools to get an entry-level analyst job. And, the rest was history. I still stayed involved in arts, and I would curate maybe 6 or 7 exhibitions in various galleries in New York after that. But after that, I kind of launched into the finance world and haven't looked back professionally.
Well, there's some really cool transitions in there, from going to cognitive neuroscience to focused on art to Wall Street. And I like that, in both the art setting and the Wall Street setting, you started with, the internship level and worked your way up and showed that you put in a lot of work and, back up what you say. And I can really appreciate that. And, I first wanted to ask about, cognitive neuroscience and art they don't often get studied by the same people, and they probably should be more. Did that play a role in how, or does it currently play a role in how you look at art?
That's a great question. I think that the answer is yes, for sure. In my experience, cognitive neuroscience and studying the brain is really a important exercise in understanding how we learn and what we pay attention to and why, and both as a way to sort of understand why people make decisions, but also our own decisions. And when looking at art, I will say that I learned early on to not overanalyze it in some ways. I think particularly with contemporary art that's very conceptual, sometimes you really just have to kind of let it wash over you, or you you don't impose your own meaning, or you try not to. I think we all impose our own meaning on art. But I think that having that sort of rooting experience and understanding the brain and attention definitely made me think about the kinds of questions that I ask when I look at art. And what was a particularly interesting experience for me in studying the brain was when I was in school for this. It was around 2000, 2001. It was the beginning of the concept of neuroplasticity. Up until that point, for decades, it had been assumed that our brains don't really change. They grow through puberty and they get to a size, and then they basically slowly die off as we get older. But researchers had found, sort of in the very late 90s and early 2000s, that actually our brains change. They continue to grow, they continue to evolve. And in fact, every single moment, every single experience is changing our brains. And that's why I think that looking at art is so important, because it's a way to experience other people's thoughts, other people's creativity, and throughout time. And I think that does challenge us, and the more that we're challenged, the more that we grow. And I will say that also those experiences of studying cognitive neuroscience and then also studying art came into play, I think, when I thought about psychedelics, or when I was introduced to psychedelics in a therapeutic context when I turned 30. And, I'll preface it by saying I, like many people, experimented plenty during college, with psychedelics in a recreational way. But it was only when I was 30 and I was sort of ready for a career change, and also ready for just a sort of emotional development chapter to be turned. And I had done therapy for many years. I'm a big believer in psychotherapy. But I kind of had reached this point where I felt like I just was getting the same answers. And it felt like this immovable block around why was I, still struggling with some of these same thoughts or ideas from a decade before. And I think it's also just turning 30, creates a sense of desire for change. And I was introduced by my partner, Kalika, to a plant medicine practitioner who was a very skilled and is a very skilled healer. And by being introduced to plant medicine such as ayahuasca, I learned very quickly that these are not drugs. These are not, a recreational experience. And it's totally different than anything that I'd ever done previously. But those first experiences with psychedelics instantly brought back a lot of that knowledge and awareness about cognitive neuroscience. And it did it in a very visceral way. The first time that I drank ayahuasca, I literally went into my brain, or had this experience of going into my brain and activating areas that had shut down years before due to anxiety or depression and stress, and really reactivating them. And it was this idea of sort of neurogenesis and all of these things in written in neon lights in front of me. It was just so vivid and clear that this is a tool that is empowering me to rewrite the way that my brain works. And that was really the light bulb for me that said, this is a whole new paradigm for both me and really everybody else who feels like they are struggling or are just unable to change, or just their life isn't working, and the same old things aren't working. And it's like, there are tools,
Yeah.
and I would call it a tool. It's like
Yep.
it has to work, in my experience, in combination with therapy, in
Yeah.
combination with lifestyle change. But wow, it was very powerful. And I'll tell you, the first day that I did a plant medicine ceremony, it required me to, at the time, I was working on Wall Street, I was working too much. I was taking, Wellbutrin, an antidepressant, and I had to dial it off to do this first ceremony. And I was a little stressed about that. And, at the time, I, like most guys on Wall Street, definitely drank and smoked and did, all the other things to try and stay awake and stay stimulated. And from that first ceremony and the experience that came out of it, and my awareness of my ability to heal myself and the tools that I had been given to do that, since that time, and that was 10 years ago, I have not taken not just an antidepressant, but any pharmaceutical of any type in 10 years.
Wow.
I have not, I've really stopped eating sugar, drinking alcohol, smoking cigarettes, all of those things. It's a total lifestyle shift.
Yeah.
And that, I think, really woke me up. And that's inspired a lot of the work that we do now.
Psychedelics are such a powerful component in helping to break down walls. And like you said, in combination with treatment and eating properly. And it's really incredible to hear sort of the 180 that your life took in many ways after that experience. And that's, something that is, I've talked to a few different people about on the show, and it led you to take your business in a new direction as well.
100%. It was really interesting first off, it's kind of funny. When I went in to do my first really high intensity, high dose ayahuasca experience, I was nervous. I was nervous for a lot of reasons. I was nervous about what I had heard about the effects. Am I going to throw up? Am I going to go crazy? No, all of the sort of typical anxieties, none of which came true. Well, I probably did throw up, but that was part of it. But I also worried that I was going to have the experience and then I was going to no longer be a capitalist. And I was going to know, I was going to come out and I was only, I was going to go off into the Amazon and focus on, climate change, which would have been fine. But I was, nothing wrong with that. But I had this fear that like I would, and maybe it was, I would somehow go and do what my family always expected me to do and go into the nonprofit world. And after that experience, and I had all of these visions and all these experiences, I woke up and I said, oh, thank goodness. I actually am going to take this into the business world and focus on having an impact through business. And that to me is really what I've aspired to do. And I think that it was interesting to see right around 2017, 2018, that there was the sort of start of a psychedelic industry appearing around that time. And when it first started, it was interesting because it was a lot of, frankly, unscrupulous characters who had, ridden the cannabis stock boom, particularly sort of Canadian RTO stocks. And then they had moved on from cannabis to crypto. And then when that had kind of petered out, then they had suddenly said, the next thing is mushrooms. The next thing is psychedelics. And suddenly these companies that were literally not much more than, a piece of paper with, a vague business plan written on it, were RTOing on the Canadian Stock Exchange. And I was looking at this as somebody who had seen the impact and seen how powerful this is and just said, this is not good. This
That's
kind
not
of
who we want this in the
speculation.
hands of, right? Either.
100%. Like, these are not the people that are going to bring this therapy to the world. And so I pumped the brakes initially, and I saw, I looked at a ties Series A or Series B, and didn't do it. Didn't do the deal because I, at the time, thought the valuation was a bit rich. And that was one of the more high quality deals, but there were so many others that were not, that I decided to take a wait and see approach. But it was after maybe another year and a half, and the momentum kept building, that I think a lot of actually really high quality entrepreneurs started getting attracted into the sector. And we started seeing opportunities to fund business builders.
Yeah.
Our first one, I believe, was Mind Bloom, which is an at-home ketamine telemedicine business. And I think that was really the start of something for us, which we've continued, which is to see that there are real world-changing company builders around psychedelic therapy. And it really, for us, I guess, falls into two buckets. One are the people building the new compounds, the new therapy. So that's really kind of like a biotech drug discovery kind of play. We have backed Beckley SciTech, which is the for-profit spin-out of the really transformational research institute in England, the Beckley Research Foundation. Their for-profit business is looking at 5-MeO DMT, as well as some other compounds, and commercializing those for research and then therapeutic purposes. Another Transcend Therapeutics doing methylone, which is a sort of cousin of MDMA, much fewer sort of hallucinatory effects, but strong neuroplastogen effects, really focused on PTSD. And then care delivery, sort of how this gets to people. And that's Mind Bloom, and that's Journey Collab, another company in the space that came out of Y Combinator, and initially we focused on drug discovery, and now sort of care delivery, and also looking at, that company is now also looking at some of the other tools for treating addiction that are non-drug focused.
Yeah, I mean, the potential is out of this world, and I'm glad to hear some of this work is being done. A few questions around it. One, I know you guys really aim to balance mission and impact with your returns, and myself, having done some venture investing, done impact investing, I've seen how much sort of impact and balancing mission can make it difficult with certain investors, and they're like, well, we just want returns. And I'm very much the type that I also want to balance mission and impact with return. Has that ever caused a struggle? Obviously you stick to your principles, but does that make things harder for you in some capacity?
Honestly, no. And I think that we struggled with that early on. And I think that part of that was, frankly, my experience coming out of having sort of experimented in the sort of world of ESG investing. And I had actually started a meetup group of impact investors called Impact Investing NYC. We became the largest angel investing group in New York City focused on impact. And that experience really showed me that, for one, so many investors care about the impact of their investments. And secondly, having seen how many of the firms that led with a impact focused return framework really struggled to articulate that effectively to their investors, to their portfolio companies, and frankly, I think spent too much time making reports and charts of their impact and not enough time doing actual deal sourcing. And for me, I think that my partner and I have always felt that if we begin with an ethical underpinning. We start with the lens of we're only going to focus on mission-driven founders that are really looking at the world's biggest issues, that we can sort of trust them with our own lens and monitoring and oversight, of course, but we can trust the right people who really care, who are really creating impact, to stick to that and to build companies that matter.
Yeah.
One of the great examples of this, one of our first investments at Delphi, was in Imperfect Foods.
Mm-hmm.
Imperfect Foods, which really pioneered this idea of the carrot with an extra leg, or the slightly bruised apples sold directly to consumer, was founded on this idea that something 50 to 60% of most vegetables and other produce never make it to consumers because they're slightly misshapen or they don't meet the requirements of grocery stores, and so they're thrown out or composted, or they just never make it to people. And at the same time, you have a huge swaths of America that don't have access to organic, healthy, and nutritious food. And they saw this as an opportunity to arbitrage that and to sell direct to consumer at a lower cost and bring healthy organic food directly to people. And, that was a 10x investment for us, and which we're very happy with. And the impact and water savings and just access to food that provides, I think they're in 48 or maybe 50 states now, is really impactful. And I think that, we just saw how company culture, when done right, keeps mission-driven companies on track.
Yeah, no, I love that Improper Foods as an example, and I really appreciate what you said about mission-driven founders. Obviously here, I think people are the answer, and you're going in a people-focused way about making your initial decisions around these businesses, and I think that is a great way to do it.
Yeah, thank you. I think that we have to really focus on our understanding of people, and due diligence is a big piece of this. And I think that we, by having a founder-focused approach, spend a lot more time with founders than many investors that are just looking at the market or just looking at the technology. I think you have to do all of those things, but by working with founders that really care and have shown a commitment to mission throughout their lives and throughout their careers, they self-select for these kinds of traits of integrity and authenticity and mission focus. So people are the answer.
If you're enjoying this episode, I would greatly appreciate if you could review, like, comment, or subscribe on your favorite platforms. Your engaged support goes a long way in helping the show grow and getting our impactful guests heard. Now back to the show. Appreciate it. And I know that Delphi is one of the biggest investors in the psychedelic space. What portion of your portfolio is psychedelics versus other things?
We have made about a half dozen investments in that space, and I would say that it continues to be a big focus for us. I'd say historically it's been about a third of our investment focus. What I think has been unique about Delphi is that, well, a lot of the air has come out of for-profit investments in psychedelics since really the end of 2021, early 2022, as interest rates have crept up, and many people, really in biotech in general, but also in the psychedelic sphere, have moved on to other assets. We've stayed committed, and we have perhaps circled the wagons a bit and focused on our portfolio companies. We've continued to fund them. we've continued to fund the founders and the teams that are continuing to make moves in this space.
Yeah.
And I think that it's been an opportunity to also build much stronger teams. At Beckley SciTech, as an example, we made an acquisition a little bit over a year ago of Eleusis, which had been developing a psilocin drug, which is a prodrug of psilocybin, delivered intravenously for treatment of depression. And I think that what we're seeing now in psychedelics has been, in general, consolidation, frankly, around some of the winners in the space. But I will say that given the potential impact of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the increased energy around the MAHA movement and the awareness of psychedelics as a powerful medicine that have been understudied, underfunded for so long, has been just an amazing shot in the arm for the space, both on the commercial side as well as on the philanthropic side.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly hope things are continuing in that upward trend. Myself having spent about a decade in the cannabis industry, and seeing sort of the ebbs and flows. It's a very different business, but in some ways it's similar in that it's brand new and related to mind altering substances that haven't gotten enough studying because of outdated laws. And, right now I feel that we are in that lull in the cannabis industry where, your portfolio companies were good. We're lucky to have you in that spot during sort of a lull in the psychedelic space. You mentioned continuing to fund them, and, businesses that I work with in cannabis that are still around are sort of doing that. They're treading water for the time being and continuing to build a deep foundation so that, when the move happens that does push things forward, they have a greater head start. And it sounds like your portfolio companies will have that in the psychedelic space.
Oh, 100%. And, we never consider ourselves cannabis investors until we made a cannabis investment last year. And it was a company that stood out to us because of the quality of their brand and of their ethos and mission. And it's a company called Rose Los Angeles, and they make ultra premium edibles. And they do that by working with regenerative organic farms and working with new chefs on a monthly and quarterly basis who are really at the top of their game, from amazing restaurants. And they do these collaborative drops around essentially Turkish delights, just delicious little perfectly packaged cannabis edibles, particularly with a focus on low dose, because so many people are like, oh, I'm not an edibles person. And I was neither until I tried these. But what was really unique about that business was that, well, first of all, the brand was so phenomenal, and that's what drew us in initially. But pretty much immediately after we made our investment, we started looking at the space around hemp-derived THC. And this is a really interesting sort of regulatory legal gray area.
Yeah, and I spent a lot of time in cannabis policy, 7 years on the board of marijuana policy project, and I'll say that within the industry, it's very controversial because there's all these people that have tried to play along with the rules of the regulated industry to show that we can be professional over the years. Meanwhile, of course, loopholes are going to be exploited because people want these products and the laws are moving too slowly. And so some good companies, sort of use that loophole and they create beautiful products such as Happy Chance, where I'm an investor. But it's this weird conundrum of like, man, I really wish this could just all fit in the regulated and tested system, because there are a lot of bad players that are creating crap.
100%. 100%. And I think that's been, such a big issue, obviously. Low quality products sold at gas stations and other places, and often to children, or just, with with all sorts of crazy stuff in there. The new thing is they're selling mushroom gummies that don't actually have mushrooms. It's basically, I think, a bath salt derivative, but they're selling these. What I thought was similarly disheartening was, some of the news that's come out over the last year or two with some of the fraud in the testing of cannabis here in California, where, even in the regulated space, the presence of pesticides and heavy metals has been really pervasive. And, some of these labs have certified things that they shouldn't, and there's just no trust. And I think that what we hope is that we have a greater sense of regulatory clarity. And, I think we all hope that we'll finally see some federal legalization come in the next few years. So fingers crossed. But I do think that one of the big issues is this issue of toxins and heavy metals in cannabis products, just like it is in food. And I think that one of the more interesting things that we're looking at as investors, but also as just longevity and health focused people, is really at what goes into all of the things that we're all putting into our bodies. There's a number of people from the biohacking space, as an example, such as Brian Johnson, who has a supplement company that's promising triple testing of all of their ingredients. And what's scary is that we are now in a world where things need to be triple tested. But they do, because when you start to see some of the results of these food testings, there's a couple of accounts on Instagram. Lead Safe Mama is one of my favorites, where they're literally taking things, even the like healthiest products, Siete chips or prenatal vitamins from these sort of organic healthy companies, and their cadmium is through the roof, the lead is through the roof. We really need a new dynamic.
Yeah, they don't, even if they have these principles and think they're doing these things, many of them don't understand their supply chain enough in the first place, if they are calling themselves organic, etc. So it's definitely concerning to see and disheartening, but I agree. I hope that we're on the path to improving that.
I think a big piece of it is that we all need to wake up to the need to detoxify ourselves. I'm a big believer in every 3 or 6 months doing a heavy metals detox, or at minimum doing testing. There are simple at-home test kits for toxins, mycotoxins, and heavy metals. My favorite is called the Total Tox Burden Test by Vibrant Wellness. It's a little expensive. It's $500, but you basically just mail in a urine sample. It's very simple. And you get back a few days later a report, and it says you have high levels of mold, you've got, lead, arsenic, X, Y, and Z. And frankly, we all do. But for me, I did this maybe 6 months ago, and I was shocked. I was shocked at the amount of mold and heavy metals that are in my body. So I started really digging into this, and being an investor in Parsley Health, which is an amazing functional health company, obviously gave me an unfair advantage to have the experts around me to help guide me in this journey. But that really led me down the rabbit hole of how we sort of detoxify ourselves. Actually, earlier today, I was at Surya Spa, which is an Ayurvedic spa here in Los Angeles, which is really amazing because it takes this sort of ancient technology of Ayurveda, which has been used in India for thousands of years for detoxification, and brings it into our modern sort of wellness landscape in a beautifully designed space with amazing treatments and sort of clean food. And it's a very sort of special experience, and one that I recommend whether you have access to do Ayurveda treatments or you simply do an at-home test and then do a detoxification program. I think we all are going to become more and more aware of, we need to do this because frankly, with the forever chemicals, the PFAs, and to BPA and everything else, like if we're not monitoring, measuring, and then doing the best that we can do to clear this out on an annual basis, we're not going to be able to have children and we're not going to live very long. And I think that's frankly what's happened over the last 20, 30 years to our generation. So,
yeah, I mean, it's a shame to see how pervasive these things have come. And it seems to have come along the lines where testing and studies are often funded by corporations that just don't care. And it's crazy to me to think about from a humanitarian perspective. And now we're in a spot where you really need resources if you're going to do it really well in terms of making yourself healthy. And, you mentioned earlier sort of the transformation we're hopefully going through as a society in that respect. So, because I hope that it will become democratized to the point where, any average Joe can not worry about their toxin levels, or at least have access to things that they can afford that, aren't full of them.
100%, 100%. And you bring up a great point, which is that, so much of the research has been funded by big pharma with their entrenched incentives for so long that so many things have been overlooked. And particularly in women's health, women were not even included in clinical trials until, or really expected to be included in clinical trials until the 90s. As a result, not only do we know very little about women's health, but there's some really serious conditions such as endometriosis that we understand very little of, that's driving massive infertility and sickness, chronic health conditions for millions of women, which is just wild. Another one is sort of reproductive longevity, which is really, I think, important as we look at both the rise of infertility as well as just the need as a society for people to keep having children. And one of the companies that has really done a lot of interesting work around this is an offshoot of one of our companies called Cambrian Bio. Cambrian Bio helped seed and incubate a company called Oviva, focused on ovarian health. And what they found was that, as we know, women lose eggs at an increasing rate starting in their early 30s. But by increasing what's called their AMH, their anti-Müllerian hormone, that reduces the amount of egg loss that happens. And the longer that we can sort of delay menopause, the impacts on breast cancer rates, on bone health, there's so many health factors that come up for so many women during menopause. So really looking at that, and that's a company that should have so much more funding and should have so much more resources behind it. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we're sort of entering into a new age where people are looking at these questions that we haven't really asked before. Maybe psychedelics is part of that.
What do you envision for the future of Delphi Ventures?
Delphi has always been focused on early stage venture capital, and I see that continuing. The creation of a foundation, I think, is one of the more exciting things that we have been working on for a couple of years, and we see launching next year. For us, there, really is not a big difference between the impact of for-profit businesses and the sort of impact or necessity of accelerating, whether it's research or conservation. What I mean by that is that the more that, for example, a portfolio company like Cambrian Bio gives us the tools to live longer and live healthier, there's really no point in living longer if we don't have a world to enjoy. And so that's why conservation funding has been such a keystone issue for us. One of the things that I'm really excited about in 2025 is the work that we're doing, both with the funding of some specific studies around psychedelics, which I think, frankly, remains a space that needs a lot more focus and funding and attention.
Yes.
We'll continue doing that. In addition, we've done some really interesting work around conservation. And something that really gets us excited is looking at how we can um, support communities to think about alternatives to extractive development and really develop new approaches to whether it's agriculture, ecotourism, new ways to support themselves, create jobs without destroying the natural resources that they have that are so precious. One of the places that we're doing this is in Hawaii. There is a amazing sacred beach called Punalu'u Black Sand Beach on the Big Island. It is the last untouched piece of coastline on the Big Island that has not had a big resort sort of plop down onto it. And unfortunately, a couple of years ago, a developer purchased a lot of that land and is proposing a development. And this is the last sort of nesting place of the Hawaiian hawksbill turtle. There are so many endangered species that are really there, and not to mention that this is a place that is a home to historic Hawaiian burial sites. This has been a sacred land for millennia, and while we recognize that development is important, it's absolutely important. Jobs are important. It needs to be done intentionally. So what we've been doing is to support some local nonprofits, one of which is focused on Hawaiian Native cultural practitioners who are challenging the developer through the courts, as well as the Center for Biological Diversity, which is taking the lead on slowing down this development so that we can, hopefully create enough awareness and support so that we can present the developer with some other alternatives, such as preserving the land or selling us the land so that we can preserve it. And projects like that have impacts in communities that lead to, less pollution and, more respect for, indigenous communities are things that we're really excited about and that really are the reason that we do all of the things that we do at Delphi. That is why we have started a venture capital business, has always been to make enough resources to fund the impact that we want to have, whether that's for profit or that's nonprofit. So we're really excited about that for next year.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that perspective. It sounds like an incredible project that you're working on there, and definitely thank you for that. And I share, the same look in business, or the same outlook on business in terms of making money so that we can put it back into creating positive impact and also preserving what we have.
100%, 100%. And I really appreciate the way that you've supported the cannabis space for so long, and I think that's a kind of impact that really needs to, be honored in the way that I think cannabis has helped so many people, have an alternative to pain pills or just change the way that they rely on some of the pharmaceutical products. And it's both, THC, but CBD as well. And I think that these sort of plant-centric medicines are still too repressed, and I'm excited to see what this next decade looks like. Obviously, you've done a lot of the foundational work to help get us here, so thank you for that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And Yeah, I think cannabis was certainly a good sort of door opener in kind of getting our society back into natural medicines, et cetera. And hopefully, we are only going to get more accessible in terms of cannabis and these other incredible medicines. You mentioned earlier, like they're not drugs. It's like drugs has such negative connotation to it, and it's frustrating. It's like these are truly medicines.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, frankly, there's a paradigm shift going on with just the way that healthcare is delivered in this country. And I think that we are going to necessitate as a society some changes in the way that we receive healthcare, seek healthcare, and this dynamic between um, unhealthy food, pharmaceuticals, and sort of the negative feedback loop there um, is starting to show some cracks, and I'm optimistic about that.
When we were chatting the other day, you mentioned to me that you're a great grandson of a 12-term U.S. Congressman, Andrew Lawrence Summers, who did a lot of really good things in the world, and especially close to my heart, helping to combat anti-Semitism.
Yeah, a lot of inspiration in my life is really derived from the work of my great grandfather, who had grown up in Brooklyn at the turn of the last century. His father had been an Irish immigrant who came over under the toughest of circumstances, and so the story goes, was helped and supported by a Jewish family when he was a child. And my great grandfather was at the time one of the, I think, the youngest member of Congress at 24. And he was quite successful and was involved in sort of the committees on weights and measures. And in the 1930s, he was quite outspoken about the dangers of Hitler. And starting around 1934, which was early, um, he began giving speeches and writing articles about the dangers of Nazism
Wow.
here in the United States. And 10 years or so later, when World War II started, he was one of the first people called by the group surrounding Peter Bergson, who was a person affiliated with the Irgun, and people who were focused on creating support for um, Jews in Europe and figuring out how they can be supported by the United States. The United States at the time was still pretty indifferent, frankly, to the plight of the
Yeah.
Jews. So the work that my great grandfather did initially was really focused on this idea that the Jewish people should be able to defend themselves and the creation of a Jewish army. And I think that was really, I mean, it was a big idea. It was a big controversial idea, but one that it worked. And in the twilight of World War II, we actually saw the creation of the Jewish Brigade, which fought under a Jewish flag and saw action in World War II. He was also involved in the creation of the War Refugee Board, which helped save 200,000 Jews from Hitler. And also, that led him to be involved in some of the early discussions around the creation of the State of Israel and helping to support $100 million loan from the United States to the nascent state. He actually had the opportunity to visit in 1948 in the last weeks of the War for Independence as led a small congressional delegation. He would die in office in 1949 in his 50s. He was still a young man. But his legacy, and that legacy of speaking out for people who were being brutally repressed is one that's always really inspired me. And it's led me to really feel a passion for Holocaust education. I think it's really important to remember the Holocaust and to draw lessons from that, and to think about how we are going to remember in this age of AI, particularly. And, I have a lot of conversations about this, but I think that we're in a really scary time. Yesterday, Sora was released by OpenAI, this text to video generation tool. And while that's extremely exciting, for those of us who see a lot of disinformation online, particularly around Holocaust denial, I think it's terrifying. And I think we're in a scary time for Holocaust denial. And I think that we as a society need to think about how we protect history.
That's a really good point in the AI age in terms of protecting history. Yeah, the Holocaust denying stuff is disgusting. As the grandson of Holocaust survivors that eventually immigrated to the U.S., I'm sure that your great grandfather was, part of what helped them get here. So I certainly appreciate him, and you're definitely doing him honor in your work, and still supporting his efforts in many ways, and just supporting the evolution of humanity.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think that one of the formative experiences for me in my 20s in New York, I joined the board of an organization called the Wyman Institute for Holocaust Studies, where we were looking at how to use comic books to educate about the Holocaust. And we did some projects with Stan Lee and some other sort of big names in comic books. We did a project with Disney, and that gave me an opportunity to meet some survivors. And I think that to really get to know survivors of the Holocaust is kind of a life-changing experience, because they are people that have survived the unimaginable, and they have survived just the most unspeakable acts and experiences that one can really ever conceive of, and they've overcome it. Well, they've survived. I mean, I think that when I look at the impact psychedelics has had on my life, and having had difficult childhood experiences and struggled with those, and then thankfully living at a time in life where I have access to these tools, I've seen how hard healing is, right? Healing is hard. And to appreciate how much healing or how much just strength many of these survivors have is really, really powerful. And I think that it is a testament to that strength, that we as a generation that has grown up in luxury or has grown up with a lot of privilege, really have a duty to honor those sacrifices. And I think that personally, I always sort of grew up with that as a given. And I've been shocked, frankly. I think many of us have been shocked over the last few years about the rise of anti-Semitism and, frankly, Holocaust denial. And I see this, and I honestly, I think it might be because when I go on X, I have, it picks up that I've searched for the Holocaust in the past. And so it clearly has identified me as a white nationalist Holocaust denier. And so my whole feed is just the most outrageous anti-Semitic memes and things. And I am motivated to really look at how is this happening? What is going on in our society now? I know that, and I honestly, I think it's separate from current events in the Middle East, which certainly have divided a lot of people. That said, I think this really predates this. I think that and for me, particularly Holocaust denial, like this is history. Like this should not be controversial. And the fact that something like 25% or more of teenagers today believe that the Holocaust never happened is is a failing of society and of the American government to teach history.
Yeah, I mean, it makes my stomach turn, and having had grandparents and hearing firsthand accounts, like it just makes me so disgusted to think of that stuff promulgating. And we've had hate sort of slowly creeping into our culture, and people being desensitized to it in these years. And while I do agree it started before, the recent politics and everything that's going on, October 7th of 2023, I think, opened myself and a lot of the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors and Jews that grew up, in the age that we did. It opened our eyes to the reality. We always heard from our grandparents, never again, and, that we have to keep the history alive. And, that day we really saw why, and how humanity can sometimes deteriorate to its worst. And, while we don't have we do have a lot of footage from the Holocaust, unfortunately, or fortunately, I suppose, from history, we have direct footage of things that happened that day that people decide to say isn't true. And it's frustrating. So to sum that up, I really appreciate the work that, you and your family have done over the years to support the cause and to support keeping history alive.
Thank you. And I really would say that we as a society and we as people in the technology sphere really have a opportunity right now to look at all of these innovations that are happening today and to think about not just the next AGI or all of these inevitable new developments, and that's exciting, and we should all be excited about that. But we also really need to honor history and think about what it means to educate the next generation going forward. Because frankly, I think so much of the hatred and the division in this country, a lot of it is rooted in education and in education around history. I think that the more that we look at, including more diverse perspectives in curriculums, including Holocaust education in school curriculums in a updated, relevant way, and using AI and new technologies to educate the next generation,
Yeah.
is only going to, help us and help us as a society rather than continue down this sort of dark doom spiral that I think
Yeah.
social media and any of us that log into, X or TikTok seem to see. And frankly, I do think that there is I think there are, whether it's foreign actors or other agents that are influencing the level of division that we are surrounded by on social media today. I don't think that we as a people, if we were sitting in a room, would necessarily be that different. And it goes to that point. People are the answer. People on the internet can seem scary, but like often it's not people, they're bots, they're algorithms, that are influencing us. And I think that, we need to really look at that and look at the way that we have real history education and experience, as a way to combat some of this and to create more understanding, like a shared culture, a shared cultural experience and understanding of our shared history, and understanding other people's and other cultures' history will probably go a long way towards healing up a lot of this division.
Yes, we're much more alike than we are different, and really appreciate this perspectives you've shared. I'm going to go down to the final question that I ask every guest is this: if you could snap your fingers and fix one thing in the world, what would it be, and how do you think that change would reverberate?
That's a really good question. I would say that I think that fixing our food system and ensuring that there were no toxins, heavy metals, and other sort of contaminants in our food would really have a massive impact. I think, there's so many things, there's so many ways to answer that question, and so it's hard to pick one. But honestly, if we could get the toxins out of our systems, if we could get, and by extension, out of our environment, I think that, we as a society, we as a country would be so much healthier. We would live longer. We'd have more time to solve a lot of these issues. Frankly, I think people's, IQs would be higher. A lot of the, rates of autism and other diseases would be lower, and just we as a society would be healthier. And I do think that a healthier community, a healthier country, a healthier world is, it's a human right. And I think that, we as a society need to figure out how to snap our fingers and make this happen.
Yeah. Yeah, we really do. A healthier world would be a much better one where we are closer to reaching our potentials individually and as a whole. And Pip, I just want to thank you so much for the incredible work that you do, for sharing your time with me today. How can people that are listening support you and your impact?
Yeah, thank you for asking, Juan. Thank you so much for having us. We have a really great and engaged community on Instagram. So our Instagram is Delphi, DELPHI.VC. And on there, we have a lot of content, not specifically about our companies or our businesses, but really about the things that we care about: the environment, about positive approaches to health. And that's really the best way to engage with us. And it's really the platform that I think is pretty unique for a VC firm to be communicating with people. We actually just surpassed Sequoia as the #1 most followed VC firm on Instagram. And I think that we're just really excited about visual storytelling. And I think that's the best way to engage with the Delphi story and the Delphi mission.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to see where Delphi and you go in the rest of your story. Look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you.
Thanks for checking out this episode of People Are the Answer. For more information, go to peoplearetheanswer.com. Please like, subscribe, rate, whatever you can do on various platforms. We really appreciate the support. And if you're interested, check out my other podcast, The Late Game Podcast. You can learn more at thelategame.com. Thanks.